Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Cruz, and I'm from Embrace Ayurveda. Today, I have Joe Tandberg here with us. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I met Joe a couple weeks ago back in Asheville, North Carolina, at the NAMA conference, the National Ayurvedic Medical Association conference. And it just so happened that we sat across from each other at the dinner table one night, and I was so inspired by Joe's energy, her enthusiasm, and wanting to connect and share. And I didn't know she was going to end up being one of the featured speakers the next day on the main stage. So when I was attending that event, I saw, oh, that's Joe. I sat with her at dinner last night. And I was so moved, Joe. I was so moved by your story, what you shared with us, your personal journey of how you found Ayurveda and working with cannabis and herbs and your yoga teaching background and how you've brought it all together. And so I wanted to share with the world, what it is you offer in terms of your medicine that you bring, as a practitioner and as a cannabis clinician, an Ayurvedic Wellness Counselor, and yoga teacher. So Joe, welcome. I'm so pleased to have you here today.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Yeah, that was a beautiful gathering and just such a perfect serendipitous moment to sit down and meet you and all these others. We were all based in Washington State and somewhat, regional neighbors with these similar interests and career choices of how we've gotten to this place in our life with Ayurveda. And thank you for having me on your program today.
Absolutely.
So, where do I start?
Well, I wanted to just share with people about your company. It was really the way you work with medicine, with herbs, with essential oils that I was very inspired. And so your company is called ZV Botanicals, so zvbotanicals.com. And I'd love to hear, before we get into what all of that is and what inspired you, I'd love to hear a little bit more, maybe not the long version, but the short and sweet version of what brought you to Ayurveda and working with these medicines in this way.
Sure. Absolutely. I'm happy to share, Sarah. So I found my path to Ayurveda through yoga. That was my first step into this, new world of healing and wellness and science, a different form of science than I ever learned. And I was quite the budding, early scientist with my microscopes and my, studying bugs and leaves, and went on to a totally different career in my college years of writing and photography. But as a young child, I loved science. And I just wasn't really ingrained in me as a girl to follow it. So it's just something I kind of did out by myself in the driveway, and then went to school and wrote and did all those other things. But when I was a teenager in just embarking on college, my writing and photography time of my year, I started having a lot of abdominal pain and cramping. I won't go into all the details, but the ultimate diagnosis was Crohn's disease. It was a slow build and a bad fiery crash. So by the time it hit me, I have a lot of what you'd call Virgo type A or an Ayurveda Pitta tendencies. So already the self-criticism and the trying to be best at everything and improve my studies and impress my parents and do all those things that with how I was raised really started to become internalized, and I was not handling my stress well. None of this did I understand at the time. All I knew was I didn't feel good. I was sick a lot. I was bloated. I was constipated. I was chronically in pain. And luckily I was given an early diagnosis because my father also had been dealing with Crohn's disease for pretty much since I was 10. So I had about 8 to 10 years where I was already familiar with this diagnosis and kind of the ramifications of this illness. Unfortunately for me, I had a much more severe case than my dad. So my dad kind of did what he wanted to do, ate and drank and golfed and played and partied and took some pills and just dealt with it. But for me, I was unable to do any of those things. I hit the wall hard. And once I kind of came out of that time of my life, I had been on pharmaceuticals for many years. I was immediately put on immunosuppressive drugs and high doses of prednisone. I went through 15 years of, from basically 19 into my 30s of just struggling to survive in a way that wasn't miserable. I mean, I had a good life. I got married, I had a job, and, I was trying to make things work, but I was never really comfortable. And I definitely had to plan my meals and how I felt and events and how I would struggle through the pharmaceutical side of having this illness. I had 2 kids, and when my second child, my son, was born in 2000, he had quite a bit of health issues that he was born with, and most of them we are pretty confident were because of the pharmaceutical infusions I was receiving. They were a low chemotherapy, low dose chemo, as I was told, but it really messed me up, and unfortunately it messed up his immune system. And so when he was a baby, he had severe asthma and eczema that it was just horrific how bad his skin was. And it was a whole nother level when I had a little baby now that I was trying to heal. And throughout this, I was looking for alternatives. I was reading books and looking at herbs and trying this and trying that, but I had absolutely no understanding of how to really integrate this in my life. So fast forward a few more years, I got to the point where I had to have my a small bowel resection surgery because I was just not, the drugs were literally shutting my organs down. My heart was having issues, my liver, my lungs. I was not functioning as a human or a mother. And so I had to have part of my colon and small intestines removed. And I vowed to myself to find an alternative. I'm like, this is it. I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. And when I was released from the hospital, they told me that I would be on a new, to me, drug, methotrexate, which is another form of like a low-level chemo, self-injected for the rest of my life every week. And I said, no. So they talked me into it for 1 month, and that month was vertigo, migraines, and horrific nausea. And I just said, I'm not doing this anymore. And around the same time, I had become a yoga teacher, or was becoming a yoga teacher. I was in that world of just stepping, onto the mat, and it was changing my life. And so with that, I was introduced to Ayurveda, ended up living in San Diego for a few years and finding a practitioner to help my son. So I was really just focused on my kiddo. And this first year of working with an Ayurveda practitioner changed everything for both of us. My son got better, not like healed and like miraculous, like he's perfect, but he came to a place where he wasn't suffering. He didn't look like he was suffering because his skin always was swollen and in pretty rough shape. And he was able to eat kind of foods that were, he was able to eat in a way that was more nutritious and hold the weight on, because we both struggled. So that was my introduction to Ayurveda. While I was learning it from I'm being the patient or I'm being the client, I was also involved in just a beautiful yoga teacher training program. And through that program, I was introduced to Ayurveda from my teachers. Like, if you're going to be a yoga teacher, then you need to understand the concepts of Ayurveda, because they're sister sciences. One doesn't really exist without the other, kind of only in America. And so we're going to give you the full training. So that was just a taste, and it really just blew my mind. And, I wrote across my journal on day one, I'm going to learn Ayurveda. And I still had to figure out how to say it and spell it. It was not easy for me. And I was definitely humbled quickly on how much I did not know. And that changed everything. It changed how I was able to stay off pharmaceuticals. I've now stayed off of any kind of drugs since 2004 for my Crohn's disease, which I was told is impossible. And I've lived a good life. I've felt great. And I understand now, when things start to slip, what steps got me there, and then how to turn things around. And it allowed me to incorporate those teachings of Ayurveda to my children. My daughter sustained a traumatic brain injury as a child, and it was a very precarious few years trying to get her brain health back, and all the ramifications that came from that experience and the swelling in her head. And now she's a certified herbalist. She's in her 20s, and it changed her life completely. And so that was kind of the beginning. That was the beginning of all of it, was really myself and my kids.
Wow, your story is so inspiring, Joe, and it's so personal to you, why you do what you do with Ayurveda and medicine in this way. And I can see that, applying these things in your life, it's helped keep you off of pharmaceuticals for almost 20 years. It's almost unheard of when you hear of that, like being able to not be on those drugs for Crohn's disease and whatnot, and that these natural forms of healing can absolutely support us in this way. So what I heard in your other talk at the conference also was how you've been able to support your children, your parents, your community. Like, you've become kind of the family healer, it sounds like.
Yeah, my brother and his nieces call me Auntie Dr. Joe. And I always say, I'm not a doctor, you guys. Please don't ever, don't confuse me. And they're like, yeah, but you always help more. And, I have friends that are doctors. I have so much respect for doctors. And unfortunately, they're kind of given the short end of the stick when it comes to natural forms of healing and nutrition, and they don't have a lot to offer. And part of how it's mostly how they're trained. So it did start with my family. I mean, I look back, I was actually visiting a cousin in Brooklyn, New York a couple of years ago, and I found this blend of spices and teas from like 12 years back for Christmas. I was like, my God, you still have this? He's like, oh yeah, I love it. I'm like, well, clearly not enough because you never finished it. And he's like, well, it's more like a token. It's like, this is when you started, everything was handwritten, everything I would do was just be, everyone was my guinea pig is what I used to joke. I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work, but we can try. And it kind of built from that. And then I attended Kerala Ayurveda, and under the tutelage of those amazing doctors, I really was able, and practitioners, to take it to the next level. And I've done practitioner training. I just haven't graduated, and I've been pretty much acting as a practitioner with my own experience, but I just don't have, all the hours behind my formal education yet for the next level.
Exactly. Well, as an Ayurvedic wellness counselor, plus all your personal hands-on experience, you have so much to offer. And I'm wondering what it is that inspired you to integrate CBD, your cannabis products, into your practice and make those available for the world beyond your own family, friends, and clients.
Oh, that's a good question. So in 2015, gosh, life is going by so fast. My father, who, as I had mentioned, had Crohn's disease, had been having some problems. He'd had a cough that wouldn't go away and went in for some tests. And, fast forward to a stage 4 a diagnosis of stage 4 cancer, metastatic melanoma. And it had spread already inside through lymph nodes, adrenal gland, his lungs, and stomach. And that on top of a Crohn's disease, lifetime Crohn's disease, was a pretty rough diagnosis. And it was basically recommended that there was very little that could be done. He was too advanced, and with his kind of comorbidities, he was not a good candidate for chemotherapy or radiation or even surgery. And there was some targeted immunology drugs that were still in the testing stage and had side effects that could really create some serious problems for my dad due to the Crohn's. And so we were left with basically go home, retire, get your things in order, and make sure that your wife is well cared for. And this was in June, and they were thinking he would not be alive by the end of the year. And so I put on my we're going to fix this hat and figure this out. And I was already familiar with cannabis, and it was something that I had been learning more about because, it just recently gone legal in California, and we live in Washington and Oregon. So we're kind of in it, but it was always more recreational the way I understood it. And so when I was reading things about it medicinally, I really didn't get it. I'm like, I just don't understand how this works. So I did a deep dive and learned about the oils and learned about the terpenes and the cannabinoids within the plant, just like any other plant, but in a way much more evolved with the human body, of how over thousands and thousands of years, this plant has a lock and key mechanism to our body, within our brain, all of our organs, throughout our skin. And it has quite a homeostatic effect on our body. And that's a very generalized way of describing it. There's a lot of details here, but when I learned that, I was like, well, let's figure this one out. And why don't I already know this? And, I explored why we have prohibition, why it was illegal, which blew my mind. I mean, the whole history is just disgusting. And that really brought out the social justice in me. I'm like, we got to change the laws, and we have to let everyone in the world know that this plant saves people's lives. And so I started making stuff for my dad, and like, Dad, let's just try this and see what happens. And he was let me just say, I did not grow up with cannabis around. It was a big no-no. My dad was an Army colonel, and he was a federal prosecutor. So I was raised in a very conservative Catholic Southern part of the country, from that kind of father with, a mom married into that, and very proudly so. So this was way outside the comfort level of all of us. And, a lot of family members called me to tell me I was crazy, and to tell me that my dad's going to die and that this isn't going to work. And I said, you guys can all just shut up and let me see what we can do. Let's just try. Because what do we have to lose at this point? And here he is today. 8 years later, he's cancer-free. It is a long story that I won't go through today, but what did happen is, once we started working and I started figuring out how to work with these oils, it was not like, oh, take this and we're good. It was 6 weeks of really trying to individual with these oils, find out exactly the best dosage for my dad. And the beauty of the plant is it's personalized dosage. The challenge of the plant is it's personalized dosage. It's not like, take 2 and call me tomorrow. It's not like that at all. And the first PET scan that he had 2 months after we started, the oil treatments with no other pharmaceuticals showed a reduction in the size of his tumors. And that's all I needed to see. I'm like, this works. And at this point, we were also doing Ayurvedic herbs, and I did the best I could putting my parents on a protocol according to Ayurveda, very, very challenging with their mindset and their lifestyle. Not proud of me cleaning out their pantries and refrigerators. There was a lot of tears and a lot of yelling, like, you can't take that. I'm like, you can't eat this, So we met in the middle. We found something that didn't disrupt their life so much that he wasn't going to do it, and just enough to where we could see the results. And it was shocking. He did try 4 out of 29 of the infusions of this targeted immune drug, because the oncologist convinced them that he has to try this, even though the tumors were already shrinking. He did it, and he almost died from it. So it did create expanded fissures in his intestines. He was bleeding internally and had to immediately cease and desist from that protocol. So it was thank goodness we already had the cannabis oils and these other bitter herbs in place, or he would not be here today.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So that's how it started.
You're such an inspiration, Jo, just hearing how you've healed your family, and, you're thriving, your father's thriving all these years later, drug-free. And yeah, every time I hear
yes and no. I will say, to be totally accurate, he is not drug-free. He is cancer-free and drug-free for cancer, but it's interesting that you should say that, because, do I even bring this up? But, behavior is everything. And so unfortunately, the behaviors of pre-cancer kind of came back. Like, I can eat and drink and do whatever I want, stay up till 2. My parents like to have fun. And so they kind of go on these big trips, they blow it out for weeks, and then they come back and my dad gets sick for a long time. And so he's now dealing with, a gallbladder that's failing, and congestive heart, problems with blocked arteries in his heart and all kinds of other things, but he still doesn't have cancer. So, but I can't get him to eat the right foods necessarily and follow in some of these other ways of living. It really is a choice. And we can only do so much for people.
It's true. One thing I've noticed as an Ayurvedic practitioner is if people in my own family have had things come up with their health, automatically my response historically would be, oh, I know what we can do. Let's get you on this diet, these herbs, this protocol. And over time, I've learned that not everybody is wanting to change their whole paradigm of how they eat and live and think. So I've learned that, sometimes just trying to be that good example in the family is enough, like just being that for them. And then when they're ready, they come around and might start asking questions.
That is so true. My mom is also suffering from some severe heart problems right now. And, she keeps getting shuffled from doctor to doctor to doctor, and let's scan this and let's test this and let's do this. And my brother keeps calling me, because we're the only 2, and we keep flying back and forth across country to help them and show up at the hospital. And it's been 5 weeks with them this year already. And he said, well, did you tell Mom that she can't do this and she should do this? I'm like, no, I'm just holding space now. I show up, I drive into appointments, I do what needs to be done, and we fix, a roof issue, or, do what needs to be done to help them be comfortable in their life. But I'm not giving advice anymore, because the advice I give across the board is, I have a doctor I recommend, here's an Ayurvedic doctor that can help you, and so they can trust in someone else, because that's when it is too close, there's lines that get crossed, and it's very challenging with people's egos to accept advice, especially from their children.
Such a good point, Jo. When you were talking about preparing these medicines for your dad and you said oils, were you talking about CBD oils, or what kind of oils were you referring to?
So it was actually both. So for many cancers, not all, you actually need high levels of THC in these oils. And when I say oil, I use oils in kind of an interchangeable way. They're more extracts from this, where the plant has been, you're extracting out the resins from the plant material we use an ethanol or an organic alcohol type of program to do this. For some people use CO2, some people use other more volatile alcohols, which I don't recommend. So we're separating out the plant material, pulling all the good stuff out of it, and then that is blended into another base, like a fatty oil, such as olive oil, because it has a really nice biodynamic quality to it that allows it to infuse those extracts and all of those beneficial terpenes and what we call cannabinoids, which are part of the plant, into our organs and into our body. So with my dad, I was doing, well, I started in a way, I won't go into the details, but it was not pretty because I didn't know what I was doing completely. But we started with like really high sticky extracts, and they were a mess and very expensive. And we figured out how to, well, that was part of the process. How do I make this accessible for people? And at the time, I was doing a lot of like YouTube style training. And then I eventually got myself into like a really reputable doctor-led program to teach me what to do once I figured out where to go. It's like finding the right Ayurvedic doctor. Like, where do you start? So once I got into that program, I started really understanding, how to dose and why we need THC versus CBD. And in my dad's case, he did need high levels of THC. And it was a very slow process to introduce that so that he didn't feel high all the time. And he didn't have those psychotropic effects. And what the THC does is it helps to literally break down and kill the cancer tumor in a targeted fashion. It's not like a blitzkrieg where it goes in and everything blows up around it and you're killing healthy cells and healthy tissue. It's just, we don't understand quite why it does it that way. It's like this innate intelligence of the cannabis plant that goes in and just knows exactly what to do. And it helps assist the body in creating the mechanism and the environment to shed this tumor or to kill the tumor. And then I back it up with other herbs to help support the liver and the blood so you can shed the dead tissue out of your body and it's not just floating around and ending up somewhere else. The CBD actually is taken in a separate, there's a combined and then there's two separate ways. So there's a couple times he was taking medications every few hours to saturate his system for about a year. And the CBD helps to stop any metastasizing or spreading of those cancer cells. And that's really important. When someone calls me and says, and this happens at least once a week, and I'm not exaggerating, I live in a small town, it's really weird, but constantly, friends of friends of friends or family members somewhere in the United States have somebody they care about that just got a cancer diagnosis. It just happens a lot. And I always say right off the bat, with a few exceptions, and I'll ask a couple quick questions, if this, and this is in case, or if they're not taking this drug, then they need to get on this much CBD, at least a minimum right away, just to get the body into a place of balance to where ideally, if things are working properly, those tumor cells aren't just proliferating throughout the body. So at least get it under control. I say the same thing if someone has a stroke or any type of cardiac event, epileptic or seizures. There's certain times that CBD right away is your first line of treatment. Unfortunately, it's not being taught in medical school yet. And so very few doctors know this. And, I had a good friend who had a stroke here in town and I rushed to the hospital, brought CBD, and the pharmacist confiscated it. And I was so upset, and it was like $150 bottle. I wasn't mine. It was before I was making my own. And I'm like, well, can you at least give it back? I wouldn't give it to him. And it was unfortunate because it was a very young friend, and he could have survived this in a much better way had we intervened early instead of letting him stay there like a vegetable for 10 days trying to figure out what to do. And, so both are important. CBD is more accessible. It doesn't have the psychotropic effects, so people feel safer with it. But many times you really need to have the THC too. And that requires usually some hand-holding and counseling and really teaching people to understand what they're getting into, because you can get into problems if you don't know what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like you're really on the cutting edge with all of this, Joe, because I've been seeing CBDs and THC and all these different cannabis products out in the world. And as an Ayurvedic practitioner, I want to learn how to use these, but it's a bit overwhelming. There's so many different kinds of products. And when I heard you speak, what you were saying resonated. And also because they're blended with other herbs and essential oils, and they're very intentionally prepared in a very pure way. So I feel like I'm still learning a lot from you. And just so thankful that you've created this company that has these products available to help people and heal so deeply. So with ZV Botanicals, you have mostly, is it CBD tinctures and bitters and teas available?
Yes. And so the products that I make are CBD dominant, which means the plants that we have grown for us, we don't farm the plants ourselves. I can only do so many things well. And so somebody else to do some of the other things. So we have, we have our plants from seed grown in Oregon, in Southern Oregon, which is nice and sunny and beautiful soil. And they're tested. So it's really important with products. So yes, mine are CBD products. And the reason being is that way I can serve my clients and my family across the United States. If I had chosen to do what I really wanted to do, which is have higher levels of THC, ideally like a 1-to-1 ratio, they're kind of like a blend of both, then I could only sell it and grow it and make it state by state by state. And so that's where you need like $1 billion. And, I'm a tiny little husband-wife team, and there, that's not going to happen. We were self-funded. And so we decided to kind of meet people where they are and where people are comfortable. And I'm comfortable working with people with CBD. There's a lot less that we have to consider as far as, too much. You can't drive a car if it's THC. Too much could mix with your medications if it's THC. Too much could drop your blood pressure too much if it's THC. So I really wanted something in the more safe zone. If someone decided to self-medicate, I don't feel so responsible for something that could go wrong. That being said, when I work with people that do need THC, I'm more than thrilled to talk them through it and help them source it or teach them how to make it. It's like I kept telling my mom, you're a beautiful gardener, just grow your own. And she's like, oh, I just couldn't do that. I'm like, oh, for crying out loud, it's a plant. So, it's trying to get people past that conditioning that we've had for quite a long time, that this is this, heavy drug, substance one as bad as heroin, and it's just not. So I started with CBD and Ayurvedic herbs and essential oils, and I wanted them, each of my formulas is supportive of the different doshas. So I have one, and I do have tinctures. The reason for the tinctures, and they're all in a cold pressed organic olive oil base, due to the most medically bioavailable oil for cannabis. They just have a beautiful relationship together. And not to say, cannabis and coconut oil is not great, or sesame oil is not good too. It's just, I really wanted to follow the medical science that I learned. And that kept coming back to olive oil and how much history we have with olive oil and how healing it is, both on the skin or in the tongue, under the tongue. And the reason I chose tinctures, because of the bioavailability and because of the way the body metabolizes and how it's absorbed into our bloodstream versus going through a different process of metabolizing in our liver when it's taken as an ingestible, like a gummy or a cookie, or all the million ways that people have cannabis these days. But then I was also learning a lot about how to use it on our skin. And again, my brother and my son had severe eczema. And so I was constantly trying to find something that worked for them. And I did. I made this salve and I threw a bunch of Ayurvedic herbs in and, just played witchery for a while and sent it to my brother. I'm like, how about this? And he's like, oh my gosh, that's magic. And so I called it Magic Salve. And that's how my salve started. It really just started for skin. But then, I literally got a text from a neighbor today who has this massive swollen nodules down her back due to a candida die-off infection something. And she said my salve is the first thing that's helped her. It like reduced it in front of her husband's eyes in 20 minutes. And I'm like, really? Oh my God. Okay. So I love it when people tell me, I find all different uses for the salve. Body oils, I have massage body oils that also are specific to like skin that's more vata, pitta, or kapha leaning, that help to balance out those doshas. And then I do infuse those with, again, the cannabis oils. It's great for inflammation and pain. And it's just, I've had incredible results with people that have like little skin issues, like little skin bumps or skin eruptions, or like little pieces of skin cancer. I've had phenomenal success with people that tell me later, because I can't ever like say, oh, you have cancer, do this, it'll work. I can't ever say that, but I'm like, try it, see what happens. And the results have been amazing. So I just kind of added some products. I have a mouth pulling oil, a digestive CBD chai tea. We do digestive bitters, a spice blend. Did I say mouth pulling oil? So a little bit of everything, but tinctures are what started it, and the salve, and tinctures are my best selling. I would say that across the board, most of my clients are really into the tinctures and the salve because they just work. And then when someone needs something that's stronger, I counsel people and we kind of work through how they can make that, buy that, find it, and whatever they need.
Got it. Oh, I'm personally really excited to try the tinctures, and that salve sounds amazing. I'm thinking of all these people I know in my personal life who would benefit from that. So I'll probably be placing my own order here pretty soon.
Excellent.
Yeah. And so I'm thinking people listening to our conversation might be wondering, would they get high or have any kind of psychotropic effects from any of these products?
No, they will not. Now, I will say that the tea, I've been told, has a very calming effect. People that they don't feel psychotropic whatsoever, but I have had some beautiful testimonials of people with some kind of serious anxiety that say, wow, this tea is a lifesaver, along with the bliss tincture. Those are my two really supportive of well, kind of everything, but for the most, like the nervous system, I have some beautiful calming herbs in there. The chill is very good for like also kind of cooling that excessive heat in the tinctures and in the body oil too. I use neem. I love neem. It's one of my favorite herbs, and I've just had so many successful experiences with neem and clients and family members, separate from CBD completely over the last, 15 years. That neem is also, and Tulsi are two of my big favorites that I work with in these products. But each tincture has a minimum of 3 Ayurvedic herbs plus the cannabis and the oil, and then 3 essential oils that are specifically blended in a signature formula. The scent and the taste are pretty extraordinary. I'm pretty proud of how they taste, because a lot of times CBD tinctures taste terrible. And that was a big thing. I wasn't going for like sweet and flavorful, but I also want people to use it. And that's the biggest, I would say, challenge with anything in Ayurveda is you don't want it to, or anything natural, is you want people to meet them where they are and have it really not just be successful for them, but be approachable enough that they'll continue. And it doesn't feel overwhelming. And that's kind of been one of my goals, is that it's like that compassionate care. Like, you can tell people to do all these things, but if they're down here with where they're starting, we got to meet them down here and then kind of hold their hand to get to that next level. Absolutely. And that's kind of the approach I took with the products.
It's great to know. Joe, something else people might be wondering is it legal to use these products in all states?
It is. It's not legal for some states to sell it on their stores. Like I think Idaho doesn't. And now, well, actually, that's not true. I just received a message from a friend that said, "Hey, we got CBD in Idaho." I'm like, "Oh, great." Because, state by state, it changes so much. I have no problem shipping to all 50 states, but all 50 states may not sell it on a retail place. You can fly with it. The FAA allows you to fly with CBD now, and as long as it's properly labeled. And all of our products are tested by a third-party lab, and our test results are available either upon request or on our website. It's too much to try to keep them on the labels. It's a lot of information, but they're tested in multiple times. This is kind of cool, and something I did not know 12, 15 years ago about cannabis, but it's an incredible cleanser for the soil. So especially hemp, we have like the industrial style, tall and lanky, these plants that have been used for thousands of years, not so much the medicinal line, but they have the same actions. But the ones that the type of plants that were used to make rope and paper and clothing, and you can make anything out of hemp that you can make out of petroleum, anything. You can make a tractor, you can make a rocket ship, you can make a truck, a plane, anything. And you can run it on the oil from the seed without using petroleum. And this has been known since 1940. This isn't like new science. This is old science that was suppressed because it competed with what was happening in the industrial world. But with that, when you take this industrial plant and you grow it in a field, let's say you grow it in a field that's been sprayed with Roundup for 20 years, and it only grew corn in the middle of Iowa, and it's been sitting fallow for 10 years. And it's just disgusting dirt. You can't grow anything in it. You can plant a bunch of hemp plants. Needs about a third of the water, a third less water to a half amount of water that you would need for just any monocrop. And then when you cut it down and lay it on the soil, after about 2 weeks, you flip it into the other side. And what that plant has done with both its roots and its body is it's sucking up all of the heavy metals in the soil. You don't want to make that plant into medicine. You want to put that plant in your compost bin or burn it and then start another harvest. And in 1 year, you can do that 2 to 3 times, depending on the climate zone. And you can really phenomenally improve a section of land and start cleaning up some bad fields. So with that information, you want to make sure when you are taking any type of CBD or any cannabis product, all the different letters you see around there, they're all different, basically molecular makeups of the plant, and they all have these characteristics. But if that soil wasn't already clean and wasn't tested, and if the plant seed itself wasn't tested for, what it was, and if the plant isn't tested for potency and pesticides and mildews and molds, and then the product isn't tested, you don't know what you're getting. And because of those characteristics in the plant material, you don't want to take your chance, because if it can be so good at uptaking heavy metals, guess what? You condense that into a junky oil, put it in your system. Now your body's going to have those metals. So we have the soils tested. USDA has to be approved through the state of Oregon's USDA program or state SDA program. And then the seed has already been tested. The plant material is tested. It goes off to be turned into extract, and the lab tests it again. And then when we make the product, it's tested again. And that's part of why you find a lot of products are expensive. And when they're not expensive, they're probably cheaply made and not tested. Because
Wow.
it's expensive for a million reasons, but the really to make this product, a lot of it's the regulations around it, and ideally they loosen up a little bit to be a little bit more supportive of us in the future. But it is a lot to consider for safety.
Wow, your company really has the highest level of integrity. And I'm learning so much in this conversation today, especially around how the plant draws things from the soil and how important soil testing is. I did not know that before, but it makes perfect sense.
It is extremely important. Yeah.
Joe, I'm wondering, I'm thinking of many people, many conditions that these products would help, but who specifically are your products for? Like if someone's listening, like, would this be good for me? If someone's struggling with depression or anxiety or pain, for example, like who are these for?
All of those, oftentimes a lot of these different conditions are related. Someone's dealing with anxiety for whatever reason. It could be a microbiome imbalance, it could be a relationship problem, it could be an illness, who knows the reason of the anxiety. It could be the state of the world, it could be the latest news. Anxiety runs deep, and it runs for many reasons, but then that can lead to insomnia, it can lead to pain syndromes, it can lead to weight gain or weight loss, it can, all these chronic issues can come from any of these different, can start and then create these concentric circles of distress. And what we find with these cannabis or CBD, let's just use CBD in general right now, CBD mostly, they create this a system of balance in the body. And what they're doing is they're bringing the body back to balance by allowing our brain to release certain enzymes and chemicals that we are supposed to do on our own, but most of us are not. And there's a lot of study going on globally, and the medical doctors involved in the cannabis world of why did our brain stop doing this? Like, why did we stop creating, one of these is called anandamide, the bliss molecule. So, and it was named anandamide, which is amazing because it helps us bring homeostasis or balance to our body. But if the body and the brain are not communicating properly, and much of the theories are it's because of cannabis becoming regulated and then prohibited over the last 100 years globally, because the United States put so much pressure on foreign governments to follow suit with our prosecution of anyone with marijuana, which again was a kind of a name that they use, which was not a positive connotation in our country. And I won't get into all the reasons, but it stems from racism, and it stems from segregation, and it stems from, okay, we have to keep everybody equal, then how do we put half the people in jail, or how do we put people away that don't agree with us? And so it was a very calculated, in Nixon's terms, very calculated offensive against different people, and then unfortunately it started in like the 1930s, and that was also going against anyone that was making something with cannabis, because it could help, with medicines. It was in medicines. It was like in 250 formulas in the United States. Your cough syrup came with cannabis sativa in it because it works, and it's a synergistic plant that helps other herbs work better. And so this was just, but nobody talked about it. There weren't warning signs and like, oh my God, this has cannabis in it. It was just in it. And we used the roots, in Jamaica, lactating mothers drink teas made out of cannabis roots because it's been in their culture forever, and it's how they find balance in their body. So to answer your question just come back to your question, kind of everything, we try not to say it's a panacea, but we're like, but it creates this chemical balance that we can't seem to get to any other way. And it's a lock and key. So if you look at how, when we ingest cannabinoids, how our brain and body and spinal cord absorbs it, and how only this molecule fits in this receptor, there's nothing else. The only two things that fit are these two plant and receptors. We clearly have had this in our system forever. So by withdrawing it, for now, how many generations, it's created a chronic problem. And it's really, and I'll finish with this, it's really interesting that some of the leading researchers, Dr. Ethan Russo is one of them, and he's been talking for a long time about, now I'm blanking on the exact term he uses, but it's a cannabinoid deficiency syndrome. That's what he calls it, cannabinoid deficiency syndrome. And they're looking at the link between not having this in our system for so long, and then having children, and them having children, and the increase in autoimmune diseases across the planet. Now, the autoimmune diseases across the planet can also be looked at because of the soil, the water, the air, the foods that have been, destroyed and they're not real, and all the added sugars and corn syrups. But why isn't our body able to stay in as much balance it used to, aside from that? And so a lot of medical theories are coming forward right now, looking at the connection in those. And I mean, I'm kind of living proof of this. You know, I was also diagnosed with Graves' disease. I left that part out. And that was 9 years ago. And I was told I would be on thyroid medication, potentially heart drugs forever. Runs in my family. My hair was falling out. My eyes were bulging. My eyebrows were coming out. I mean, I was a wreck. I had tachycardia, wore a heart monitor. And my doctor at Kerala, my teacher, Dr. J. Rajan, actually, he put me on some herbs and said, do not stop. And of course, after like 2 months, I did, because I got lazy and I got sick. And he's like, I said, don't stop. So, you know, a year later, I was fine. I mean, I was fine. And I was also using cannabis oils, and I've been on 0 medication for my thyroid for 8 years. I didn't even last a year on the medicine because I was able to get my body back into homeostasis using these oils. So I think anything and everything is just in moderation. And it's not a panacea in the fact that, oh, just take this and do everything else normal. No, how about we, like, you know, single point awareness, meditation, breathing exercises, go outside, you know, eat healthy, drink more water, go to bed early. You know, there's a lot of things, as you know, as an Ayurveda practitioner, that should be included in these healing protocols. But if you are looking for one thing to change that might make a difference, it's CBD.
Yeah.
And I want to say before I forget too, is not all CBD is the same, and not all in dosage takes time. So I always get really kind of worried when someone's like, oh yeah, I tried it, it didn't work. I'm like, hold up, let's step back. What did you try? How much did you take? When did you take it? How often did you take it? How long did you have? Many days? Because there's so many factors. And so I do ask people to please don't give up quickly, because they might just not be, they haven't found their formula yet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, take this formula and do all the lifestyle things like you mentioned. So there's still that part of taking care of ourselves that's important.
It's so important.
So anandamide, the bliss molecule, I have a new word.
I know. Yeah, check it out. And you know, it was one of, I can share with you at another time, but I have a teaching PowerPoint that I use, and I go into a little bit more explicit detail about that. It's fascinating.
It's kind of fun to look at these words. And if people don't know, cannabis is actually, it's a traditional Ayurvedic medicine. I think it grows, the native place where it grows is in the Himalayas, the base of the Himalayas in North India. Is that true?
It grows everywhere. It literally adapts to climates everywhere. So there's some of the most beautiful strains that are the hardest to find, that have some pretty incredible ratios of cannabinoids, like very rare, are found like in like the Sahara and like in Africa. And then you can find some in the Himalayas. You can find some like up in the Siberian area of like northern China. You can find it in Oregon, you can find it in Kentucky, you know, grows in Mexico, grows in Canada. So it's just, there's thousands of strains, and there's just so, and they just, you know, depending on where they grow is how the plant is going to adapt to its climate. But, you know, there's been seeds found mummified in tombs, like with Cleopatra, you know, oils made with cannabis in it. And they're still viable thousands of years later, because cannabis has a very strong antimicrobial property to it. So antifungal, antiviral, antibacterial. So it's, you don't need to add a bunch of extra preservatives if you correctly make the extracts, because it's like self-preserving. It's just a fascinating plant.
Such a fascinating plant. And the Ayurvedic name for it is Vijaya, the victorious one. Is that correct?
It's one of them. There's a few out there. And so Zana was another one. And that's how Zana, so ZV stands for Zana Veda. And so, you know, kind of my loose creation of it, the term of the science of cannabis, like the wisdom behind cannabis, is how Zana Veda came to be. And we just shortened it to ZV Botanicals.
I love that, Joe. So if people want to explore your products, they can go to your website, zvbotanicals.com, or if someone's inspired to set up a consultation with you one-on-one and learn about which products for them or which lifestyle practices in conjunction with the products, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, they can do that through my website. At the website, there's a tab that you drop down, and it says, I think, learn, and underneath learn, it talks about, you know, me and counseling, and what a counseling session or a series of sessions kind of looks like. And there's a place that you can click and email me directly. You can also just bypass all of that. If you're like, yeah, just give me the quick and easy, just Joanna, Joanna at zvbotanicals.com.
Yes. And then also I'm seeing here on your website, there's a tab for experiences where you have live speaking events or art events. So in-person gatherings where people can meet you and try some of the products.
Yes, we do. And we're just starting to pick those back up again. It's kind of a slow rollout from COVID. I'm actually have formed, I'm just enrolling now, a year-long wellness clubs where people come together both live and virtually across the world. And we meet weekly and we share in like learning how to introduce these products and the concepts of Ayurveda. It's really based on Ayurveda, healthy habits and routines, but bringing in the concept of plant medicine. I also talk a lot about mushrooms, both the medicinal and the psychotropic. So like psilocybin on the high end, and then the types in between lion's mane and cordyceps and turkey tail. I do a lot of work with mushrooms with my clients and have phenomenal success, which is kind of outside the Ayurveda lens, but it's just been something that people keep asking me about. So I just kept learning about. I'm like, well, we'll add that too. And yoga. So yoga was my first love. I teach yoga here locally, and I teach yoga retreats. And we like to create art experiences. We have created a beautiful home here in the Columbia River Gorge of southern Washington State. It's like an hour from Portland, Oregon. And we have land and mountain views and a beautiful like Airbnb style little retreat home that sometimes I have small gatherings. I'm having one in I think it's October 8th with a couple of women. So shamanic healing, Ayurvedic healing, and yoga with like delicious organic food and essential oils and breath practices and cold plunge in the river. And so we have a lot of fun with just trying to keep it light, but also create a discipline around healing to where you feel the transformation and you have others around you going through it together. Because it's hard to make a habit change, especially after, I mean, I'm 51 and, and even just giving up coffee is like nearly impossible for me. And so I have decided like, what are my vices that I can live with and find, I put oil in it and cardamom, I make it work for me. And what do I need to absolutely do or not do so I stay healthy, and finding those places of pleasure and how to find in between. And it's so much easier with someone else, a partner, a friend, a family member, a community of 20 people. So that's kind of my next level journey that I'm on right now, is creating kind of stepping away from the products a little bit now that they're in place and they're there, and stepping more into helping people have like experiences that are so deep that it creates that shift and you kind of can't go back. You have to go to the next place now.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your education, your healing with the world. I feel like what you have is such a treasure trove. And so, yeah, very thankful to share this with my clients and with my family members, and just excited to see where this goes. So as we conclude today, are there any words of wisdom, anything you've been thinking about, contemplating? You've shared so many words of wisdom already, but just anything that's just been on your mind, even on a personal level, that maybe you've talked with your kids about, or a neighbor, or just something that's, in your heart that you might want to share with us today.
Well, that's funny that you should ask that. There's been a lot of change in my life lately, and been on this big trajectory to move. And our house has been for sale, and 6 months of getting it ready and working with realtors and relocating to another part of the state. And then a week ago, I woke up and I had a visceral reaction to the whole thing. And we had just shown it to like 5 different couples, and 2 of them wanted to make offers. And all of a sudden, like, we're about to move. And I sat up and I looked around and I was like, but home is where, like, I'm home, but this is like what we have is perfect. And sometimes the need for change and this dynamic, like, just let's just throw everything up and just do something different, is an unsettling of another reason. And I woke up the other day and I kind of connected to what that was in my own heart. And I leaned over to my husband and I was like, I don't think we should move. And he was like, oh my God, and he looked at me and he goes, I don't either. And we're like, oh, what do we do now? So we took our house off the market, called our realtor, who's so understanding, thankfully, and we're staying. And so to prove it, we went to the nursery and bought a bunch of food and planted it in the garden. And we're like, we're restating our roots. So we're going to be here for this harvest. So I think sometimes my answer to you, my words of wisdom are like, really check in on your gut, like really, really check in on the heart and the gut, and then what words you're using either in your inner voice or to your loved ones or in your journal or that inner voice, whatever it is, and just really be sure when you make big decisions, and you can go back. People say, oh, well, you can't change your mind. And I'm like, yes, I can. And my daughter, who was really sad that we were selling this house, I built it, designed it myself. It was a very big project a long time, about 10 years ago. and my daughter was grieving it. And when she knew I was on the fence and she saw me maybe just following the path I'm already on, because it's the path of least resistance, she's like, you know what, Mom, don't care what anybody else thinks. Just do what you know is right. And I was like, we're not selling the house. So that's been my big aha, because it's been a 2-year plan to sell this house this summer. And to decide to stay was kind of a life changer for me.
Just really listening to your heart and just realizing the beauty of what you already have, like this inherent idea that we need to keep changing things up and reinventing ourselves. But sometimes just, realizing that you've created so much beauty and just enjoying what you have. That's
Exactly.
it's really profound.
Yeah, exactly. It was
that.
funny because I was in a very windy place, and I'm a vodka, so I was trying to get out of the wind, and then I realized, just shut the doors when it's windy. Go to the other. I already know all these things, but I was building the case to move, and so you start creating the pluses and minuses, and I'm like, let it all go. Just let it go, and just be here and be now.
Oh, well, I've had goosebumps a few times in this conversation. So inspiring. And I'll definitely go back and listen to our conversation again and take some notes, because I've learned a lot today.
Well, I'm happy to work with you in the future and like just answer any questions. You can always call me.
Thank you so much, Joe. Have a beautiful day.
You too.
Bye-bye.